I'd like to start by talking about love. I just thought it would be a bit odd to launch straight into a discussion about 11 and 13 plus entrance. I promise I will talk about that because that's what you're here for. But one of the things I was already hoping to achieve was to put that complicated and anxious-making journey in a much broader context about human flourishing. And this morning of all mornings, I think it would be very odd to go straight into a talk about 11 and 13 plus senior school entrance without acknowledging the slightly changed reality in which we wake up this morning. I'm sure there will be some French nationals in the audience. London is a very big French city, so I wanted to just acknowledge the events in Paris and say that it gives us all pause for thought. So I hope you'll forgive me if I was going to end by talking about love anyway, and I will come back to talking about love, and you will understand why. I promise you're in the right talk, but I will come back to it. But I'm just going to start with a prayer, actually, which sounds very strange, which is one that we use often at school, and it's one that I hope that parents of all faiths can and will subscribe to, in fact all faiths and none, because what I really want to touch on is the fact that the mission we're all involved is in the widest human flourishing of our children. And I think this very short prayer just tells the story of a world which we surely would all like for our children. So I hope you'll forgive me if I just begin with some words of St. Francis, which say, Lord, make us instruments of thy peace. Where there's hatred, let us sow love. Where there is anger, forgiveness. Where there is error, truth. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. And where there is sadness, joy. Lord, may we not seek to be understood, but to understand, not to be loved, but to love. For in giving we receive, and in forgetting ourselves, we find our true peace. For thy name's sake. Amen. And I really wanted to start there because I'm standing on a sign that says that I'm one of the big thinkers of British education, which is terribly flattering. But what I'm going to talk about doesn't feel like big thinking. It feels like terribly procedural and factual information. So this is not a very entertaining talk. I hope it will be informative. I hope that you will leave after the next sort of half hour or so feeling better informed than you are now. And I know that negotiating your way through the independent world of senior school entrance exams can provoke a lot of anxiety. So I hope this is going to be useful. But I wanted to say it's not actually my main interest. It's what parents often want to know about. What we should all be involved in is keeping that much broader context in mind, what we're trying to achieve for our children. So just very briefly to establish my credentials, Rosalind's already been very kind about me. I've been a prep school head for 21 years. I'm headmaster of Thomas's Battersea, which is a school of 540 boys and girls aged 4 to 13. And I've been head there for 16 years. I'm a principal of Thomas's London Day Schools, as you've heard. It's a family-run group of schools started by my parents. We have 4 prep schools, 1 primary academy, which opened in the New King's Road this September, and 1 kindergarten as well. We educate more than 2,000 children across central London. I'm a governor of St Paul's Boys' School. I'm a fellow at Wellington College. I'm not sure what that is. There are lots of them. Don't get too excited about that one. And I'm a trustee of Thomas's Academy. But I think perhaps more importantly, I'm the father of 3 children. Me and Katie, we have a son and 2 daughters who are all teenagers now and they're all at boarding school. So I've been through the journey that I'm about to describe, and I sort of feel your pain. But that is enough about me. So it's much more helpful if I can learn a little bit about you as well. So quick bit of audience participation, just so I know who I'm talking to. Firstly, think of a child, preferably your own. So have a child in mind just now. And is that child, let's first of all establish their age. So are they currently between 0 and 4? Hands up. Okay, between 4 and 7. 7 to 11. 11 to 13. 13 to 18. You're in the wrong talk. Okay, that's very good. Okay. I hope it's helpful anyway. Hands up, are they a boy? Girl? Not sure? Okay, good. And then quickly about you, were you educated in the UK or not in the UK? So hands up if you were educated in the UK, not in the UK. And if you were in the UK, hands up if you were educated in the independent system or the maintained system. So hands up maintained sector, independent sector. Right. That's what's called a mixed ability class. So we need to cover just about every single aspect of this talk that there is. So I will try and touch on the whole thing very quickly. This is an amalgamation of 3 separate talks that I give to my parents at Thomas's. Each one of those takes an hour, so I promise you this will not be a 3-hour stint, but I'm going to try and mesh the whole thing together. It is confusing. I'm going to go fairly rapidly, I think it's easiest if I rattle through the whole thing and then try and leave plenty of time for questions at the end to try and unravel the confusion that I will have caused. It's probably confusing because there is no centralised system, particularly for those of you who are educated abroad. Many of you grew up in very sensible countries which set out an education system and said this is how we're going to do it. The independent sector, by its very nature, is independent, and actually everything that I'm going to describe is trying to describe a sort of general way that most schools in the independent sector go about their admissions process. But for every statement I make, I know that there will be an exception. So if you're sitting there thinking, well, that's not what the chap downstairs told me a minute ago, you're right. So it's broad brush, that's why it is a rough guide, but I hope that it's going to be helpful. So I've talked about the broad context, and just finally to touch on that before I get launched into sort of factual information. At Thomas's, we talk about two main things. The first, the most important school rule is to be kind, and then we talk about a broad curriculum which includes lots of art and drama and music and sport. And then, in fact, we talk about three things, because the third thing is a set of values, and we talk a lot about nurturing kindness and courtesy, honesty, respect, independence, confidence, leadership, humility, and being givers, not takers. And that is what I would like all of you to bear in mind for all of your children. I'm sure you will want to bear that in mind as well. But again, I start there because the minute I start getting into registration deadlines, everything I've just said, which your heart was responding to as a parent, will go out of the window, and you'll start panicking about, have I done the right thing, and have I done this, and have I done that, and your shoulders will go up, and your breathing will get more shallow. And I want to bring you back several times to that broad mission that we are all engaged in as parents and as educators. It's so easy to lose sight of it as we start to dig into the detail of what you're meant to be doing when. So do please try and retain that perspective. The other thing about the independent sector is that it can be very confusing. It would be possible for a child, I don't recommend this at all, but it would be possible for a child to take competitive entrance exams or assessments for entry into independent schools at the ages of 4, 7, 8, 10, 11, 12 and 13. In fact, it would be possible for them to go from the age of 4 to 18 with only 3 years. That's year 1 when they're 5, year 4 when they're aged 8, and year 9 when they're 14, when they're not preparing for some kind of entrance assessment. As I say, I don't recommend that, but if that thought fills you with horror, then I would go around downstairs and look for a school that goes from 4 to 18, and then you can just forget everything that I'm about to say in the next half an hour. What I'm going to focus on today is entry into schools at 11 and at 13, which covers the majority of senior independent schools. But it is a problem, I think, that the independent sector can become incredibly fragmented, and then anxiety about preparing children for those different entry points can then impact on what the school is trying to do to remain true to that broad perspective with which I started. So that's all the preamble. What we're going to talk about now is sorting out some terminology, giving you some clear guidance on the timing of what you should be doing when, trying to impart a little bit of wisdom based on 21 years of prep school headmastering. I'll touch on scholarships and bursaries, and then I'll bring it all back around to joy and love again. So when you start hearing about love, you know you're getting near the end. So hold on for that moment there. So let's just try and clear up some of the terminology. Sounds an odd question, but what is common entrance? Common entrance, the words common entrance are often used quite loosely by parents. You'll hear parents say, oh, it's a nightmare, my child's taking common entrance. And it gives the impression that there is a sort of national exam, which all children do in the independent sector, called common entrance, and that's actually not the case. People often use the word common entrance to describe a very broad range of different types of senior school entrance exams and assessments. Common entrance actually has a very specific meaning. There is a board which used to be called the Common Entrance Board, funnily enough. It's now called the Independent Schools Examination Board, so the ISEB. It has a website, you can look it up. And they produce a set of published syllabuses, or syllabi, in different subjects, and they produce 2 lots of entrance examinations each year. 1 lot at the age of 11 and 1 lot at the age of 13. That board is made up of teachers in the independent sector, at both prep schools and at senior schools. They produce these exams, they sort of put them up there, and then any school that wants to can opt in to use those specific exams, those ISEB exams, as their entrance exams. And that's specifically what common entrance means. So the schools that use those particular exams tend to be, at the age of 11, girls' boarding schools, like Bendon and Wickham Abbey and Downhouse, will tend to ask girls to sit exams in English, maths and science at that age. There's a set of papers at 13, where the ISEB produces exams in English, maths, biology, chemistry, physics, French, German, Spanish, Latin, Greek, history, geography, and RS. And those are used by lots of co-educational boarding schools, such as Bryanston and Marlborough and Wellington, and lots of boys' day and boarding schools like Eton, St Paul's, and Westminster. So all of those schools choose to use Common Entrance as their entrance exams. 13+ exams, Common Entrance exams, are also used by girls' schools, girls' boarding schools, for the second wave of entry. A lot of girls' boarding schools have entry at 11 and at 13, and lots of those girls' boarding schools also use the 13+ papers for entry as well. So that's a very specific technical terminology of Common Entrance. However, there are lots and lots of schools that have entrance exams which are nothing to do with Common Entrance. They choose to set their own papers. So that would be, for example, in London, the girls' London day schools. We have Mrs. Elveston, head of Francis Holland, sitting in the front row taking notes. It's very intimidating. I feel like I'm sort of, being examined on whether I get it right. She'll start heckling me if I get it wrong. But anyway, not using Common Entrance are lots of the girls' London day schools. Many of them, or a number of them, have grouped themselves together in a group called the North London Consortium. They produce examinations in maths and English. But there are also other girls' schools in London, like Jags and Putney High and St Paul's, which don't use consortium papers at all, and they set their own papers. So we've got Common Entrance, we've got the girls' London day schools, and then there's another lot of schools which would traditionally regard themselves as 11 to 18 schools. Many of them used to be grammar schools and then became independent, like City of London Boys, Latimer, Dulwich, Elaine's. Again, they don't use Common Entrance. They set their own papers at 11, usually in English, maths, and reasoning, and also at 13, which is often in English, maths, science, and a modern foreign language. So, and then there are other schools like Winchester who say we are so different to every other school that we're going to do our own thing and set completely different papers which have nothing to do with anything. So I'd start with that because just to sort of unpick, you may be sitting there, I often get parents who assume that their child is going to take Common Entrance because that's what all children do, and then we'll decide which school they go to. But you can see already from that actually there are a very wide range of different types of entrance exams, and every independent school is fully entitled to admit pupils in whichever way they choose. So it's already complicated before we begin. I hope that helps in a sort of odd way. Perhaps the most useful thing I can do is try and walk you through the timing of what you should be doing when. So we're going to go year by year from year 3 to year 8. Year 3 is when children are 7 or 8, they're turning 8 in that year. And year 8 is the year in which they're turning 12, they're 12, turning 13. So we'll just go through year by year, and I normally try and separate this out in these different talks, one for 11 plus and one for 13 plus, but we're going to try and do the whole lot all together because you're a top set class, I can tell, and I'm sure you can cope with it. So this is what we're going to do now. So my recommendation would be that when your child is in year 3, age 7, turning 8, and please no earlier, lots of parents do start much earlier, but anyway, try and leave it as late as possible, but that is the right sort of time to begin the debate. I'm sure you've already begun it. The very fact that you're here on a soggy Saturday morning shows that you're incredibly committed parents. You're already wanting to know much more about the system. But my advice for senior school entry would be start thinking about it when your child's in year 3, age 7, turning 8. A couple of big questions you can be thinking about to begin with are, day school or boarding school? Is boarding even on the agenda? Lots of people, their starting point will be, I'm not even considering boarding school for my child. I would encourage you to do so, even despite the eye-watering costs of a boarding education. I'll come back to talking about bursaries at the end, because it's good to just inform yourself. Dismiss it by what you've seen, not by what you hear. So make up your own mind about it. I would encourage you always, unless you have incredibly fixed views, to start exploring both options, both day and boarding. But anyway, investigate day and boarding and make a sort of fixed position on that. You could go down the route of co-education or single-sex. It's great for dinner parties. Actually, don't talk to me about it at dinner parties. Talk to me about anything other than co-education or single-sex. But lots of opinions on that. I think the most sensible thing I've ever heard, actually, is that good schools are good schools, whether they're co-educational or single-sex. There is lots of academic research. Mrs. Elphiston will correct me on this one, but I think it says that girls do best academically in all girls' schools and boys do best academically in co-educational schools. So you can try and square that circle if you wish. But I think that's the general received wisdom. It might not just be about academic results. You may be wanting to think about their social growing up as well, and that may be important to you as a family. You may be much more focused on their academic results. Everybody is looking for something. Their criteria is slightly different. But anyway, those are two big questions: day or boarding, and co-ed or single sex. Another question for those of you that have more than one child is, are you looking for one school that's going to be right for all of them, or are you looking for the right school for each child? For 20 years as a prep school head, I said you must treat every child as an individual, and you must find the right school for each child and just deal with the logistics as a parent. All three of my children are in the same school. Our youngest, we were just about to send her off, and she said, "Can I just go and look at one other school?" And I said, "No, you're absolutely not. You're going to the same school as your brother and sister. You're going to have the same school holidays. We're going to pick you up the same weekends, and that's that." So you might change your views as you become more experienced parents. So, boarding or day school, co-ed or single sex, one school for all of them or one school for each of them. And then if you can take a position on those decisions, that will probably then dictate whether it's 11 or 13. In very broad terms, 11 is a very normal transition point for girls, because the girls' system has grown up going from 4 to 11 and 11 to 18. There are many boys' options and co-educational options at 13, because of the old boys' system where it was 4 to 7, then it was boarding from 8 to 13, and then it was senior schools from 13 to 18. So 11 and 13 therefore become the main transition point. So start that discussion in year 3. I'm sure it's begun already. In year 4, when your children are 8, turning 9, start to research the schools, and you can begin to think about registering. I'll talk about registering in the sort of the year 5 bit. If you purely focus on the brand of a school and say, my child has to go to that school, and you flog them through tutoring, we can talk about tutoring. There's a very good discussion on the programme tomorrow about what do you need tutors, but anyway, we'll come back to that. If you just squeak them into one of those big name schools and they end up at the bottom of the top 1% of the population in terms of the academic range, they can spend 5 years or 7 years in these senior schools and come out feeling that they are worthless, that they're not clever, that they haven't done very well, because they lose that broad perspective which we all have as parents. And it's no surprise that the talk before this one was all about mental health and well-being and some anxiety that we create in the world that we created by putting our children under too much pressure. So I'm labouring the point, but there is an extraordinary opportunity to be more broad-minded about our choice of schools, and my advice to parents is to try to make sure that they're going into the middle of the academic range. Now, what is the middle of the academic range? It's very hard for parents on the outside to tell. A lot of schools will give guidance. They'll talk about common entrance pass marks. They will talk about SATs levels that they're expecting on entry in year 6 as well. If you're in a junior school that is familiar with the whole process, they should be able to advise you what's going to be appropriate for your child. Scholarships and bursaries are two different things, and it's worth touching on both of them very quickly. If your child has an exceptional talent in art or drama or music or sports, do look at the scholarship pages on the websites of the schools. Lots of independent schools have lots of provision for exceptional talent. It is the standard of these scholarships is usually incredibly high. A lot of the music scholarships will go to children who are already at grade 6 in 2 instruments by the time they are 11, which takes some doing. Some sports scholarships where they're offered are often going to children who are playing at county or at national level at the age of 13. So the standard is incredibly high. If it's just that they enjoy Stagecoach on a Saturday morning, they may not necessarily be lined up for a drama scholarship. They really do have to have exceptional talent. But if they do have that, then make inquiries at an early stage. If your child is one of those, normally I think junior schools and prep schools should be trying to keep a child's interest as broad as possible. But there are some children who just know at the age of 6 that they are going to be fly half for Great Britain or whatever it is. And if your child is one of those, then do start making inquiries at an early age about scholarships. Much more important, perhaps, are bursaries, which do not require exceptional talent at all. The senior independent schools have put a lot of effort and a lot of energy and a lot of money into providing bursaries for anyone to come to the school who meets the school's normal admissions criteria. The figure that's given out is there is £300 million worth of bursaries available throughout the whole of the UK sector, independent sector, every year. So if you are in the position where you think that financially this whole process, and it is extraordinarily daunting thing to take on for your children, but if it looks completely unattainable, just ask. Always ask about bursary provision. because most independent schools are trying quite hard to find appropriate candidates and actually find it very difficult to find pupils who fit their admissions criteria. There's usually a means-tested process to go through, and you either fit the criteria, in which case funding is available, or you don't, in which case it's not. But that financial aspect is always completely separate from the admissions process as well. It's handled by the Bursaries office, not by the registration office. So there is absolutely no harm at all in asking, and schools welcome an approach from parents who are keen to acquire bursaries. So there we go. I hope that's given you, that's a big rattle through. I hope it's given you something to think about. I promised I would finish up talking about joy and love. So I'm going to finish up by quoting the ex-headmaster of Eton, who's just stepped down and clearly now has time to write books. So Tony Little, who's just finished being headmaster of Eton, has written an intelligent person's guide to education. I recommend it to all of you, just as parents. I think it's super. But for a man who is the headmaster of one of the most selective schools in the world, I think it's very encouraging that what he says is this. I'm going to leave you with this thought, just to bring you back to that very broad perspective. What he said is this: we have a habit of complicating the business of educating young people. We seem to have been adept at creating a maze where a path is needed. As technological advances introduce change at an ever faster rate, we run the risk of creating an ever more intricate maze. Yet, in essence, it increasingly seems to me that at heart, education is a simple thing, and we need to hold fast to this simplicity. It comes down to two words. I know the phrase I'm about to use may sound like some wacky social movement from the 1920s, but I will chance the words anyway. Joy and love. Education is about the joy of learning, of discovery, of achievement, your own and other people's, and about love of fellow man. Everything else is just a means to an end. So today of all days, as you embark on this process of registration deadlines and so desperately wanting, because we all so desperately want to do the right thing for your child, do occasionally just step back, take a deep breath, and remind ourselves that we are in the process of trying to find an environment which will nurture joy and love. And if you keep those thoughts in mind, I'm sure your children will have a wonderful education. Thank you very much.
While Ben reaches for a swig of water, can you think of your questions? But I just got one very quick one to start with. You were saying that people should work very hard to find the right school for their child, and you're not necessarily the example for your third child. Could you possibly talk about whether you think sometimes it's appropriate for London parents to look at boarding schools outside London?
I'll answer that one as a parent rather than as a practical head. We have a son and two daughters, and they've taken us on a journey, as all of our children do. Our son is the eldest, and our daughters are younger. My daughters, being girls, have negotiated the whole educational system pretty easily. Our son, as boys often do, found it a lot more difficult. We chose, or we had to choose, we were forced to choose at quite an early stage. So by the time he was in year 5, it was very apparent that we were not going to put him through this incredibly competitive London process. There are not that many London day school options for boys, certainly not within the sort of commutable radius of my school in Battersea. And so we were slightly forced to go down the boarding route, and we have been absolutely delighted by the outcome of that experience. It's transformed our relationship with our children. They're coming home this weekend. We can be incredibly nice to them for 48 hours. We have a lovely kind of Sunday lunch, and we all sit down and we chat about how it's going, and then we send them back to school, and they can be stropping adolescents 150 miles away down in Dorset. They're all at Bryanston, in case you're wondering. It's incredibly expensive. It requires a huge amount of trust to know that you can drive away from a place which is going to look after the whole child. But they are spending their teenage years in 400 acres of Dorset, and I'm very glad that they're doing that.